Welcome to the Master Storytelling and Fundraising training session. My name is Kieran O'Brien. I'm the director of Mini Story, and we're a storytelling agency who specializes in helping organizations and movements with a purpose or a cause, helping them to use storytelling as a theory and a methodology to drive more meaningful engagement and how to create long-term behavioral change through storytelling methodologies. In a session, we're going to be looking at something that's quite intriguing, which is how to use master storytelling to help influence the type of fundraising propositions that we use, and look at how can we use insights from master storytelling theory to create new fundraising propositions that lead to higher values and work to long-term change. So there's quite a lot to cover in this session. So we've broken it down into a few different sessions. First of all, we'll be looking at fundraising, an overview and introduction, look at what are the issues facing us as fundraisers. Then on the second module, we'll be looking at master storytelling. We'll introduce this concept of master storytelling, what it is and how to work with it. In the third module, we'll be looking at how to work with different tensions using insights from neuropsychology. On the fourth module, we'll be looking at a new motivation model, and I have to admit this is quite exciting because for the first time we can start working with the higher stages of motivation theory, which are really useful when we're trying to create long-term behavioral change on positive issues like social and ecological issues. And then in the last one, we'll be exploring new fundraising propositions, new ways of fundraising that plays to the higher value set and higher stages of motivation, which we've mapped out in a module 4. So just to quickly explain what is master storytelling, and not to confuse master storytelling with a high skill set in storytelling, as if you've mastered the art in storytelling, which I'm not sure you can ever do because storytelling is such a broad art. But master storytelling is someone who works with meta-narratives. And these are the implicit narratives that underpin the stories we tell. And when we work more and more with meta-narratives, they're not just found in stories, they're found in pretty much everything we do. Every fundraising proposition, every time we try to recruit volunteers, if we're trying to do policy change, political change, in our branding, underneath all of these are things that we call meta-narratives. And we have the explicit narrative, which is the stories we tell, and the meta-narratives, the stories that we imply. And they're the ones that really have real power over us and can shape our values, beliefs, and the way we see and relate to the world around us. So a master storytelling, it's a skill set which you can learn. So it's quite interesting. It's not something that will take you years and years to develop. You can actually learn this pretty quickly. Master storytelling offers profound insight into human motivation, so that's very useful, especially for anyone working for social and environmental change. It can be applied to pretty much everything we do. Some of the insights we will touch upon in this training, you can not just look at fundraising, you can look at campaigning, you can look at a whole range of different issues, especially if you're in leadership roles. This sort of insight really comes into its use. And then it also offers new ways of creating meaningful change on social and ecological issues. When we start understanding what meta-narratives are, how they work and how they shape values and behavior, we can start having different ideas on how to create social and cultural change, rather than raising flags and placards shouting that we need urgent action on climate change. We can start thinking about how do we do this at a meta-narrative level. And this really opens up new doorways and new possibilities around creating political change on some of the issues that we've really struggled to move forward on. This session is best viewed with a downloadable guide, which is available in the comments below. And then this downloadable guide gives all the information held in this presentation, but gives a lot more detail, and you can go away and actually study some of the insights and also some of the references that back up the theory that drives all this approach to master storytelling. So please do download that and read this either alongside this presentation or watch this presentation and come back and read that downloadable guide, because there's so much information in there. So when we approach master storytelling, I do have to warn you, there's a lot of information here. And in this presentation, we won't be able to cover all of it by any means, but we will be looking at one or two aspects of master storytelling, which we can use to think about some of the bigger issues driving the social and cultural problems that we see today. So first of all, let's explore fundraising challenges. As fundraisers, there are huge challenges across the sector, and we need to be aware of what those challenges are. And second of all, how do we address them in a meaningful way? And in this session, we'll be looking at some very in-depth solutions to these common problems that we all encounter. But what are the common problems we face as fundraisers? So speaking to a whole range of different people and different organisations, I'm in a very good position to hear what is going on, and here's a list of some of the kind of key themes that keep reoccurring for fundraisers. The first one is there's a sense of stagnant storytelling. It feels like we're telling the same story again and again. We might change the novelty, we might change the place, the who, what, where, when, why, the explicit narrative, but it all feels pretty much the same old tropes being rolled out and again and again. And when we try to change things, it doesn't quite work. So there's something quite stagnant for a lot of organizations who feel that there must be a different way that we can approach some of the storytelling so it feels more authentic, more live, more vibrant, but it also delivers on the fundraising proposition. There's also a real concern around increasing competition, and this is not competition just from charities to charities, as if we're all flooding the same space. It's also competition from the private sector, who seems to be moving more into purpose and cause-driven kind of issues. And they have a lot more money, a lot more kind of power and influence than some of the smaller charities, and they can do some really strong kind of promotions and fundraising. Well, not fundraising, but selling our goods, but using some of the same messages that we in the charity sector would be using as well. So it's becoming a very crowded market and become much more competitive, especially when we look at different platforms when we're trying to reach audiences. There's challenges in creating long-term engagement and donor retention. And this is pretty much shared across every organisation at the moment, where donors are quickly getting bored, disengaged and switching off and disconnecting. And we have donor fatigue, where even some of the warm audiences who so we hoped would stay with us for a while, they are switching off and disengaging. So it's a real challenge. How do we keep even our warm audiences engaged and ongoing and not switch them off? Also, we have a growing complexity in our fundraising strategies, where we have more complex engagement models with complex product structures and a complex array of platforms which are trying to reach different audiences. These are all the different social media platforms, different fundraising products that are kind of matched to different audiences. And once you get into this, it gets very, very complicated, especially when we get into audience segmentation and trying to be more kind of focused on what audience we're trying to reach. This becomes increasingly complex. Also feels like there's a lot of transactional relationship happening at the fundraising level, where the propositions are good, the fundraising products are good, but it feels like once they've given, it's pretty much game over. Once they've given, you might do a thank you follow up, but after that, it's really hard to move beyond that transactional giving to something which is much more long term and will feed into a longer donor retention kind of strategy. There's also a continuous move more towards kind of novel ways of engaging audiences. If we are not doing storytelling, if we're not doing something meaningful, the opposite of meaning is novelty. So we have to create some flashier, fun, exciting, colourful ways of engaging audiences, where before we can just do some pretty much standard messaging. Since we are being pushed more and more into trying to grab people's attention, and that's becoming harder and harder to do, especially in this attention economy, which there's so much out there grabbing our attention. How do small charities or even bigger charities compete with the noise and array of so much information there grabbing people's attention? So how do we move more away from novelty to more kind of substantial storytelling? And also, the more stressed we get in terms of our fundraising, so it's the more we're trying to reach our targets, the tendency is not to push up to our higher values. We tend to push down to our lower values and dial up the temperature. So keep on doing what we've always doing, but we're now going to use more extreme imagery or kind of more in your face kind of propositions in order to drive engagement. So the dialing up the temperature always feels like a last resource when things aren't working well. And we know it's not a long-term strategy, but it feels like the only thing to do given the context that we're in now. So they're just some of the themes that have come up from different voices and organizations across the sector. But one of the most important ones at the moment is this drive more towards ethical narratives and ethical fundraising. And hopefully you'll be aware of this already, and I'm not repeating something which you already know. It's a real concern around the ethical considerations that need to be embedded within our work strategies. And that's addressing neo-colonial issues, racist issues, and social attitudes that tend to create this saviour complex of us in the West, and the poor are the helpless victims who are waiting to be saved. And this narrative enforces some terrible stereotypes. It might work for fundraising propositions, but the long-term effect is that when it comes to creating long-term change on some of the issues that we're trying to champion, especially around global poverty and social injustice, if we're embedded the same psychological foundations of us, the saviours, helping those who are in need, helpless victims, is that we're undermining our cause in the long term. So this has been addressed by many organisations, and it's a really tricky issue to contend with. And the reason why it's tricky is because when we try to fix it with the mindset we have, we tend to weaken our fundraising propositions. So therefore, it's really difficult to see a way forward, a really strong way forward in terms of creating real, meaningful and powerful fundraising propositions whilst still being ethical, whilst not playing to lazy tropes of treating the audiences as a hero savior, which we know works and it's been evidenced to work. But once we move away from that model, what do we replace it with? Do we still use the same model, but we soften the messages, we dial it down? It's always an alternative way of working altogether. So we're really concerned around how do you create strong fundraising propositions. So when we move into ethical fundraising, it seems that we have these two tensions which we're trying to navigate our way through. One is a fundraising frame, and we know the fundraising frame, the donor as a hero narratives that if we play to the traditional fundraising propositions, it works, but it also creates psychological barriers that prevent meaningful change. So therefore, we should move to a values frame. But once you move to a values frame, you weaken the fundraising proposition. So it seems that the thinking, across the sector, is that we need to choose either between one or the other, or sit somewhere in the middle, holding the tension of both of them. And I think what we'll be looking at in this presentation is that's a false dichotomy. That dichotomy appears to be the only way to solve the problem because we're stuck in what's called a paradigm trap. And what that paradigm trap is, and we'll go on to a second, but until we leave that paradigm behind, we are stuck choosing between values or fundraising. And they're seen almost in conflict with each other, that one has to override the other. So how do we overcome that? And this is some of the thinking that has emerged across different voices across the sector who are trying to look at the power dynamics that exist within fundraising. And, this will take time to unpack and really go into in depth, but just very briefly and broadly, there seems to be this thinking that we have a triangle where we have the organization, the audience, and also the contributor or the beneficiary. And between the three of these, there is a power dynamic. And traditionally, the power has always been with the organization. So they are the storytellers. They're the ones who create the narrative, but they create the narrative to the needs of the audience. And therefore, all the fundraising propositions are written by the organization in service of the needs of the audience to give. And the third part of that triangle is actually the people we're trying to help, who have little say around the narratives that are told about them. So this has been seen obviously as a real problem. So the question is, how do we change this power imbalance? Because once you create a triangle, there has to be a hierarchy. That's the nature of triangles. So trying to move the triangle around, trying to move the power dynamics, maybe we should give more influence to the beneficiaries, the contributors, that they should have more say on the stories. But if they have more say, how does that work practically? Do they shape the fundraising propositions? Let's say if you're going out to a community and you want to talk about environmental issues, and the community actually aren't interested in that. They might be wanting to talk about something else which is more important to them. Do they shape the narrative for the fundraising proposition, or does the organization knows best? And also the organization knows the audience and what sort of narratives and stories we need to tell in order to meet the needs of the audience. So the more we go around this triangle and we try to fix it, there's something not quite connecting. So even if we try to distribute power and influence in terms of who tells the story, this triangle, to me, I would say, doesn't really resolve the issue. And I think we need to move away from the triangular model and explore a new model, which we'll come on to later on. So the reason why we're stuck in this power dynamics, the reason why we're stuck in this kind of dichotomy between a values frame and a fundraising frame, trying to make sense of which way we should go, is because we're stuck in a paradigm trap. And the paradigm trap I call the marketing paradigm. The marketing paradigm is one of the most dangerous paradigms we have today. And it's so dangerous is that we all use it. We all see it as the very thing that we build all of our fundraising propositions, all of our motivation propositions, and we use this engine. So think of the marketing paradigm and represent it visually as an engine. The engine which is a polluting engine. It has like a fossil fuel engine. It has a pollution that has long-term effects. We use this engine because it works, but it works by combining three primitives. So what are primitives? So every time we communicate, every time we do a fundraising proposition, every time we're trying to motivate people to do stuff, which is pretty much our full-time job, so we have to draw upon these three primitives. These three primitives, they're called primitives because you can't get under them. They're right at the base of everything we do. And they are values, motivation, and purpose. And how we use those three primitives shapes everything we do. And when we use those three primitives in a negative way, it causes real harm to our world. And it takes time to unpack this in lots of detail, but I'll try to just give you an overview of this, and there's more about this on our website, which if you're interested, you can read more. But when we look at most of our fundraising propositions, when we look at most of our communications across the charity sector, what we're trying to do, we're trying to create long-term positive change. To do that, we need to work with a set of values, and those values are called intrinsic values. Those intrinsic values are self-transcendent values. They emerge in a different kind of stress state. But when we look at all the communications or the fundraising propositions, we tend to use this engine to drive everything we do. and it uses extrinsic motivation, extrinsic purpose, and extrinsic values. Now, it might not seem like we're using extrinsic values in our communications because we're talking about protecting the environment. We're talking about social justice. Again, these are intrinsic values. But when we look at values, and it takes a while to kind of unpack how values actually work, values are not themes. If you talk about them, you're not engaging the value. Values emerge at a pre-conscious level. And they emerge from a different part of the brain, which we'll look at in a few minutes. And those values emerge out of different stress states. So if you're using extrinsic motivation to drive your fundraising, your recruitment drives, or everything that you do, you're much more likely to be engaging extrinsic values. The more you create anxiety, the more you create, you work with extrinsic values. So how does it work? Well, if we look at marketing, it's a very basic formula that we apply to pretty much everything we do. So how does it work? First of all, you create anxiety with your audience, and then you offer the magic solution. And you offer to take away the anxiety. And this works so well. You think about every advert that you're seeing, the millions and millions of marketing adverts over the years that have all been shown that somehow you're missing out. Somehow there's a better, smarter upgrade which will make your life better, give you more power or influence. The clothes you're wearing aren't good enough, but if you buy certain clothes, people will love you. Always play into our sense or fear of missing out. These marketing messages are so seductive and work so well in driving our behavior. But they're all using extrinsic motivation, playing to our extrinsic values around fear, anxiety, and greed. And they all have an extrinsic purpose. The idea that if you have something, it will take away your anxiety. If you buy this product, order will be restored. Despite the fact that it was a marketing advert that created the disorder in the first place. You have this kind of strange context that marketing creates anxiety and then offers a way to get rid of the anxiety. But because it happens so subtly, we don't tend to notice this. Just think about all the adverts you've seen over the years. They all seem quite friendly, quite fun, quite enjoyable to watch. So you can laugh along with them. But they're all playing to our deepest fears and anxieties in such nuanced and subtle ways. So are we doing the same in our fundraising? And when I look across sector, it's absolutely clear that almost all of our fundraising propositions tend to lean towards a form of extrinsic motivation. Because the nature of fundraising is as influenced by marketing theory and the marketing paradigm, all of our fundraising propositions are geared towards raising money. The offer that if you give £5 a month, that will be the solution. So our tendency to oversell fundraising as a solution to all of our problems, that's clearly in our fundraising strategies as well. And the more nuanced aspect of this is once you create fear and anxiety, you play to any form of extrinsic motivation, you warm and engage extrinsic values. Even though you're talking about an intrinsic value, which is protecting the earth, if you're saying that the world is burning, it's falling apart, we need to take urgent action, that is an extrinsically motivated strategy. So you're using extrinsic motivation to try to engage an intrinsic value, and there's huge problems in that. So we need to start thinking about these three primitives that drive everything we do, and how can we move from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic? How do we move from extrinsic purpose to intrinsic purpose? And what is intrinsic purpose? And more importantly, once we do that, how do we engage and warm intrinsic values? Now, just say for this workshop, we won't be able to go into values or purpose because these are huge subjects which will take a long time. But we will touch upon motivation and use just one of these primitives to explore how to create fundraising propositions that lead to meaningful change.